let's get started.
Yeah, let's get started. So welcome everyone to the webinar this afternoon. That's been organised fantastically by Lydia Dareheath, and I, as Vice Chair of the South East Committee, are going to chair it. And on the call we have presenters Sarah McMath, Oscar Watkins, and Alice Piure. I'll introduce those in due course. Now, the Cunliffe. So myself, I should introduce myself, shouldn't I? Apologies. My name is Jamie Jones, and I work for Ports of Water in the daytime, and by night I'm the Vice Chair of the South East Area Committee for the Institute of Water. And so welcome everyone to this webinar on the Cunliffe review. So a huge turnout, and I think we've now got everyone in, and we're up to 192 people on the call. I know a lot of people are also quite. I'm going to listen to the recording later, and so a fantastic turnout. And this has been a very busy time for the water industry. There's a lot going on at the moment. There are CMA appeals happening at the moment. We are in the press on a near daily basis. We're also setting up all of our frameworks and our delivery for AMP8. But topping all of that, there is now the Cunliffe review. And this is a fantastic opportunity to understand what this is about and to explore what it could mean to the industry. And so what will be its impact? What change will it have to the industry? These are the sort of things that we'll be exploring in this webinar. And so without further ado, I want to introduce our speakers. They are Sarah McMath, who is the incoming president of the Institute of Water, the ex-president of the South East Institute of Water, and by daytime, the CEO of MOSL. You also have Oscar Watkins from Pennon Group as head of regulation and policy, and Alice Piure as the regulation strategy manager at Anglian Water. So a big thank you to our speakers, and before I go to Sarah for a more in-depth introduction, I just wanted to say a big thank you to the South East area sponsors. Our sponsors provide financial contributions to us as the Institute of Water South East Committee, and these help us to put on events throughout the year. And there's lots of events coming up throughout this year and next year, and look out for those on our website. And I'll also flag a few key ones towards the end of the conference. But I think it's enough for me. I think we're 6 minutes in. We're now up to 203 people, which I think is a record for the South East. And I want to hand over now to Sarah to give more of an introduction.
Great, thank you very much, Jamie. And just to add my welcome to this lunchtime webinar, where we're going to be providing some perspectives on the recent recommendations from the Independent Commission. We're not going to give a detailed overview of everything. It will be very much a view from two water company perspectives, and then I'll give a view as market operator of the non-household market. But I just wanted to, by words of introduction, reflect on, I've now worked in the water industry for 32 years, and I genuinely believe that this review provides us with a real opportunity to drive significant change in our sector for the positives. It's really important to note that with 88 recommendations to government, this review is very wide-ranging. And really importantly, there are no silver bullets. So one of the things I really love about the Institute of Water, and why I'm very proud to be taking on the new role as National President from September, is that we are open to everyone working in the water industry. Whether or not you work for a water company, a supply chain company, a retailer, a regulator, or even a market operator, the Institute of Water brings us all together at times like these, particularly where there is significant opportunity to move things forward. And all of these 88 recommendations will require us to work together, using our collective skills, our knowledge, our experience across all parts of the water industry and from outside the water industry. And working together, we can ensure that we have a sector moving forward that's delivering both for customers and the environment today, and is an attractive investment proposition to continue to invest for the future. So once we've heard from Alice and Oscar, I'll then give a more business retail market perspective, but we do aim to leave a good chunk of time at the end for questions. You're welcome to put those in the chat. I think Jamie's just posted. You're welcome to put those in the chat as we go through or at the end, and Jamie will coordinate questions into our panelists. So with no further ado, I will hand over to Alice to lead us off.
Great. Hi everybody, and thank you for inviting me to be here today. I'm delighted to be able to talk a little bit about Cunliffe's final report, and I would just agree there with Sarah that it's a massive report, but there's so much in there that is really positive, and it's very encouraging to see that Cunliffe has really thought about what is the right solution for the industry that's going to set us up onto a sustainable footing for the future, and so there's a lot to feel positive about in there. I'm not going to try to talk about the whole of the report or like to cover all of the recommendations, and instead I just wanted to talk about one of the particular issues that I see with the existing regime, and the extent to which Cunliffe's package of recommendations will address that issue. So the problem that I would like to talk about is the ability of the current regime to make choices and take decisions on difficult trade-offs. So I have a background in strategic planning, and this is one of the problems that I have really lived and breathed and seen played out in real time. So it's an area that's very close to my heart. I think this is one of the key failures of the current regime, that there is no guiding mind sitting at a national level helping to balance the need for improvements with bill increases and other considerations like net zero. So as you can see it in the box there in the table, the water industry, water companies have a whole suite of targets that we are expected to deliver against. And as these targets have been developed, they have been done so in isolation by different regulators and different government departments. And nobody has really looked across the suite of all of the things that water companies are expected to deliver and thought, does this make sense and is it coherent? So as a result of that, water companies are faced with this suite of targets and expectations that they cannot deliver against because they don't add up to a coherent whole. Some of these targets might be mutually exclusive. So to give an example of that, water companies in the east of England are being pressed to make large reductions in the volume of water that they abstract from the environment. This is to support environmental health, and it's absolutely a very laudable objective and not something that we would disagree with. But we are worried about the impact of this. So it is possible that these large reductions in abstraction are going to drive some very significant investment in desalination. Now, desalination is a very high cost and carbon intensive solution. And whilst we do need to look after and support environmental enhancement, we also need to think about the impact of that on net zero and the industry's ability to contribute towards those targets. And it's clear in this case that some more careful consideration needs to be given to find the best balanced solution. In addition to targets being mutually exclusive, in some cases, delivery of these targets are going to be very expensive, but deliver relatively little benefit. So I'm sure many of you on this call will be familiar with the Storm Overflow Discharge Reduction Plan that sets targets for water companies to reduce spills from storm overflows to an average of 10 per year by 2050. This is going to be extremely expensive, and it may cost upwards of £90 billion to deliver. That's an enormous amount of money, and what's concerning is that the government's own impact assessment shows that this investment will have very little benefit for very little environmental benefit compared to the cost of delivering it. So spending so much money on things that aren't really going to turn the dial on our national ambitions is difficult to justify at any time, but it's particularly difficult to justify when we know that there are really pressing and urgent needs in other areas that are not being addressed. So in particular, we know that water companies have not been able to invest sufficient money in asset maintenance and asset health, and the current regulatory system has locked companies into persistent rounds of underinvestment, and as a result of that, the health of our infrastructure is declining. That makes some of these targets really questionable, and you do wonder if we're spending the right money on the right things. So delivering all of this is going to mean that the water industry has to do an awful lot of stuff, and it's almost certainly going to cost more than what people want to pay for it. So we know that AMP8 marks a step change in water company investment, but it's not a one-off. It's really signalling the start of a new era of unprecedented investment in water infrastructure. And given this context, it was particularly concerning to Steve Reed's remarks on the final report, when he stated that the new regulator will oversee investment and upgrade work, so hard-working British families are never again hit by the shocking bill hikes we saw this year. So to square this circle, something is going to have to give. The water companies cannot deliver everything that is expected of them at the time that it is expected and for the price that people want it. So we need to have a sensible discussion between government, regulators and companies about what we are going to do first, what we are going to do later, and what we are not going to do at all. So the question that I have been asking is, to what extent does the package of reforms proposed by Cunliffe support this process and enable us to have those joined up and sensible discussions? So I have to say that there is a lot to feel encouraged by in the final report. The most obvious recommendation, and probably the flagship one, is the development of a new integrated regulator. And I think having one organisation regulating and overseeing all of this should support a more joined up approach to regulatory decision making. But on its own, it won't be enough to facilitate the decisions that we need. We also need, first of all, a process for identifying those trade-offs and understanding what the choices are. So I think the proposal to reduce water company strategic plans from 9 down to 2 should really support with this, because having everything in the one place in a format that's compatible and easy to read across will make it much easier to understand what the choices are between different areas of the plan. My only watch out would be that those two plans will have to be joined together at some point to understand what the choices are between water and wastewater operations. Once you've identified what the trade-offs are and the choices, you then need a process to help make them. So I think there are a couple of things that will really support with this. The first is the National Water Strategy, which not only sets out what we want over the long term, but is intended to provide a clear framework for prioritising and managing decisions. The second thing that will really help is the Ministerial Statement of Water Industry Priorities, or the MISWIP, which is intended to be issued before each price review, setting out what water companies need to deliver over the next period within the context of that long-term national strategy. And Cunliffe has explicitly stated that this needs to include an assessment of costs and benefits and an assessment of the overall affordability of the ambition. So I think these are really positive developments that should help us to facilitate those decisions. In addition, the final one that I want to highlight are the proposals relating to the development of a regional systems planning framework. So I think this will support the management of decisions at the correct level. So some decisions can be made at the catchment level, others need to be made at the regional water company level. But where they can't be made at that level, Cunliffe includes a proposal for escalation routes. First to a national coordinator, which is really positive, and where the national coordinator can't make the decision, then for it to actually go up to government to be made at that national level. So I think a lot of this is really positive, but I would just caution that at the end of the day, there is no getting away from the fact that there will be hard choices that involve trading off against different areas of national ambition. So, particularly between affordability, carbon and environmental health, for example. these choices can only be made by government because they are the only people who have a democratic mandate to be able to do so. So I really hope that the reforms proposed by Cunliffe will be implemented in such a way that they provide a framework through which government can make informed and timely decisions and fulfil this essential role in supporting the industry by providing the strategic direction that we need.
Fantastic, Alice. I've made almost a page of notes out of that. So and the things that I thought I knew the Cunliffe report, but it appears I've only scratched the surface compared to what you've obviously read into it. There's a lot there to pick through, but I won't do that now because that be unfair on Oscar. So please, everyone, feel free to add. As Sarah said, add your questions or comments or anything you like into the chat, and I'll hand over to Oscar to carry on the discussion.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you to the Institute of Water for having me today, and to the panel and all of you listening today for sharing this time with me. I lead Pennon Group's work on water regulation and government policy across our water companies. We serve Devon, Cornwall, Bristol, Bournemouth, the Isles of Scilly, and Sutton and East Surrey. And I previously worked in DEFRA, leading the government's work on the 2024 price review until a couple of years ago. So I'm hoping that today I can offer a few reflections on the Cunliffe review from both sides of the table, industry and government, and a flavour of what I think is to come. So where to start? Well, it has been an exciting few months for our sector, and it's also been an exciting few years, I think. We've had the Environment Act, the Storm Overflows Plan, PR24, the Water Special Measures Act, and now Sir John Cunliffe's review. And looking back, and I think all of us have said this today, I think what's remarkable is just how enduring public sentiment on water has been. Issues do tend to come and go in politics, but that hasn't been the case. And water is still very much at the top of the headlines. And if I step into the government's shoes, I think the question now is not how we elevate that public debate about water. It's about how we cool the narrative. And so how are they going to do this? Well, reflecting on what we've heard, I think it's quite clear that they're driving towards a kind of narrative arc over the next few years. And I think it will go something like this. So first, the past. So far, what we've heard ministers say is that the system has failed. And they say that blame is to be shared among both companies and their regulators. And the story goes that these are the mistakes of past governments. And we've seen this recently in the commentary on Ofwat's Section 206 investigations, where they've been clear that these are into historic performance. And we've also seen this in the Special Measures Act, actually. And so second, the here and now. Government wants to be seen today making radical changes to transform the sector's performance. And the Cunliffe review is part of this, ending operator self-monitoring, a new customer ombudsman. These are all measures to take this radical change. And this, I think, is about resetting the relationship between companies, customers, investors, regulators, and government. And so I think that narrative arc is turning now to reset. And so third, what I think is going to come after that reset. And to understand this, I think we need to look at the political realities that the government faces. So we're going to have a general election in 2028 or 2029. And DEFRA Secretary of State Steve Reed's marching orders from the centre of government are to take water off the table for that election. And that is going to be an immensely tough job. In that time, Thames Water could unfortunately go into special administration. And most of the opposition parties had success campaigning on water at the last election, so I'd expect them to repeat this. And in that difficult context, government will want to build a picture of continuous progress, and they'll want to do that quickly after this reset. And so I think the focus and the pressure for industry in the here and now is rightly going to turn to the delivery of our capital programme. Storm overflow reductions, phosphorus removal, water resources. We are going to be, we're going to have our feet held to the fire and encourage very strongly, I expect, to deliver on AMP8. And that's also going to need to tie into the government's ambitions on housing growth. So the companies for which that's a particular pressure, I think, are going to be working quite hard to meet those expectations. And I think government will be getting behind the sector where it can as well, to point to genuine improvements in day-to-day performance. It's very clear that the government has decided that it can't litigate its way out of this problem. We need to improve. And to improve, we need to work together. And they're looking carefully, for example, at what is reported in the annual environmental performance assessment. And then there's Sir John's review. So the Commission has proposed a total of 88 recommendations. Now, I think it's clear that in the short term, government is going to have to prioritise. They're going to seek a bill in this Parliament, which is quite likely to start in 2026. But I think that this is actually going to be a relatively small bill. And I suspect that the focus initially is going to be on reviewing the Water Framework Directive and urban wastewater treatment regulations, and on setting up this new single regulator that Alice was talking about. But the rest, and I'm afraid the bulk of the recommendations, will need to wait for after the next general election. I think that's quite clear. So there's my narrative arc, and you can all tell me that I was wrong in a couple of years' time. And all of that might sound a little bit cynical, maybe, to some of you, and perhaps I've taken the fun out of the room. But I want to be absolutely clear. This is an incredibly important and positive moment for the water environment. And I'm genuinely hopeful about the future of our industry. And I just want to share 3 reasons why I'm hopeful. So one, the politics is difficult and it will continue to be, but it is the wind in our sails. And I'd encourage you to see past the headlines and recognise that the attention brings with it the positive change we need. And there is so much that we're going to achieve in the next 4 to 5 years. So this month, we've had draft legislation for a ban on plastic wet wipes, years of campaigning, and such an important issue, causing the majority of our sewer blockages in the southwest and increasing the risk of pollution to the environment. And we need these products off of shelves, and it's happening. We also had the announcement of updates to the Watershore social tariff to make it fairer and to expand access. And if we do have a bill in 2026 and retained EU law is on the agenda, then we're going to see some of the biggest legislative changes we've had since the 1990s. And all of this is good for the environment. My second ray of hope is that the future has to be more about the how than it is about the what. To really make this change for the environment and our customers, we're going to need to do things differently, working with nature and not against it, working with our customers to change behaviours around water use and sewer misuse, solving the problems at source. And Sir John and Steve Reed really understand this, and they're going to support us to invest more in what they call pre-pipe solutions. I think we know them as source control. And we're going to have the biggest ever campaign on water efficiency, the government's media muscle deployed to drive down per capita consumption. Water fittings regulations will be implemented, and we'll finally see Schedule 3 of the Floods and Water Act implemented. So we have sustainable drainage brought to the mainstream. And there's loads more to come. So I really think that this is where the rubber hits the road, the nitty-gritty of good policy and regulation. And it's up to us to make the most of these small but absolutely critical changes. And so a final reflection, we are making the most of this already. So we are already making much greater use of catchment and nature-based solutions. At Pennon, we've committed to be green first in the delivery of our capital programme. And we're changing how we support our customers. So in the Southwest, we're doing this through innovative tariffs that incentivise water efficiency. But we've also worked with our business customers to reverse the falling block for large user tariffs, which I know, Sarah, is one of your really big issues. So I hope that's good news. So I leave you with this. Beyond the headlines, we're making a difference. We are delivering, and we have the backing of this government. There will be a lot of change in the coming years, though, but we are on the right course, and the task ahead for all of us is to seize these opportunities to do things differently. Back to you, Jamie. Thank you.
Wow, that's certainly food for thought. I must admit, I hadn't even thought about the next steps, but beyond. And that's yeah, that's I don't disagree with anything you said, but that's thank you so much, Oscar. That's a great insight. I shall move over to Sarah now. Sarah, I saw a comment on the slides. Oscar was giving an excellent speech and chose to do it without slides. Sarah's done the opposite. So Sarah, please feel free to.
Well, I'm not going to give an excellent speech, but I've got slides.
So please feel free to do your best next slide, please.
Thanks, Jamie. I will say what I need you to move on. So thank you very much to Alison and Oscar. Really interesting reflections. I'm just going to take a few minutes now to focus in on how the Commission's recommendations impact on the business retail market, which is just one of the competitive schemes referenced in the call for evidence. So I'm just going to focus in on business retail market. So next slide, please, Jamie. So just very quickly, I can see some familiar names on the call of people who are in the business retail market, but for those of you who aren't, the business retail market opened in 2017 and allows for all business customers in England, of which there are 1.2 million, to choose who provides their retailer services for water and wastewater. So they still get the water and wastewater from the incumbent water company. But these customers, this 1.2 million, vary from very small premises, coffee shops, through to food manufacturers and oil refineries. And collectively, they use about 30% of the water consumed in England. But the market is very diverse and is very polarised in terms of consumption towards the top 1%, who use nearly half of that water. So just 13,000 customers use about 12% of the total water delivered as public water supply. And the total value of the business retail market in terms of wholesale charges is about £2.7 billion per year. So that's just to give you some scale. So what did the call for evidence focus on? Next slide, thank you, Jamie. So what the Commission focused on in its call for evidence was a question about whether or not we should limit the market to very large customers, similar to what it is in Wales, where it's a very small market of very large customers. And more broadly, they questioned whether or not the market was working. So was it delivering as it has been intended to? So we highlighted in our response to the call for evidence that we don't believe, and we have seen no evidence, that restricting the market to those very large customers would improve outcomes for the sector. Our market is still relatively new, and there are lots of opportunities to continue to develop it for the benefit of business customers, and importantly, in a water scarce environment, for the environment. So next slide looks at is the market working, and it was actually really interesting for us as a market to have the challenge from the Commission, and we had to really look hard around what some of the statistics were. And if we look just at switching, which is a measure of market success, approximately 24% of customers have switched. But as more larger customers have switched, this actually represents about 43% of water volume that has switched. But we can also see that business customers' complaints are reducing. At the same time, that household complaints are increasing. Significantly, we can also see that since the market opened, significantly more long unread meters have been read, which means if we look at the legacy long unread meters, which are meters that have never been read since the market opened, those have reduced by 95%. And we're now at around 10,000, still too many, but we've seen a real reduction in that. And we're also can see that the average market performance against metering metrics has also improved from 35% in 2017 to 94%. And bluntly, what that means is more meters are being read, and therefore more customers are being billed in a timely fashion for what they've actually used. So there is evidence that the market is providing benefit for business customers. But really importantly, if we look at the next slide, we can see that the opening of the market provides us with a lot more data to better understand water demand and water usage. And as the data in the market improves, so too does the insight we can derive from it. So in our response to the Commission, it was actually really helpful to be challenged. We adopted a very evidence-based approach to responding to the consultation, utilising the central data and the data insight we have access to. One of the things that Commission specifically focused on was the market's ability to support water efficiency as one of its key objectives when the market was opened in 2017. And this is just one example where we can see that having a national view of business consumption by sector gives a clearer view of water usage that can be used in benchmarking and to identify national patterns and trends. And this is a really key benefit to the market. One example is schools, where we've taken the data provided by the Department for Education and combined that with data on water consumption that we hold centrally. And interestingly, one thing this shows us is that 23% of schools are in the group 1, which is a very small users. So individually, customers that don't use much per premise, but rather than focusing on the size of the market, in our response, we focused in on looking at the priorities. So if we look at the next slide, please, Jamie. So focusing in on raising awareness of the market, particularly for those smaller customers who may benefit from switching but are not necessarily aware of the market currently. To improve the profitability of smaller customers, to enable for greater investment in services, to look at how the market can drive the efficient use of water, to support wider water security challenges in England, and really importantly, to identify opportunities for reduced demand in potable water to help provide headroom to support economic growth. An example would be prohibiting the use of potable water for non-potable purposes, for example, external cooling. More broadly, in our response, we looked at, again, we've heard some of this already, a national strategic direction and a streamlined and aligned water plans, really importantly that better understand and account for water consumption from businesses. The current WRMP process does not fully, does not give us a good understanding of business consumption. As Oscar mentioned, in innovation in tariffs, we very strongly support the removal of bulk tariffs where customers pay less for their water the more they use. Very supportive of the acceleration of smart meter rollouts throughout the water company business plan, particularly on the larger meters and those meters that are currently hard to read, and also to support funding mechanisms to help reduce water demand, supported by grant schemes that are available to business customers and potentially to retailers or third parties to access funding. So if I move on to, well, what did the report say? Very pleased that we saw clear alignment with our asks, both for the retail business market and for the wider sector. It's clear across the board, and we've heard this from Alice and Oscar, that developing a national long-term cross-sector strategy for water was a consistent theme from respondents and has been a strong theme in one of the top recommendations to government. There's also a very strong focus in the recommendations on water reuse, particularly removing those regulatory barriers that currently provide barriers to non-potable water usage where it's appropriate, and also customer side solutions such as grey water reuse and rainwater harvesting for non-household. But there were 2 specific recommendations on the next slide for the business retail market. The first one recommending that the government conducts a full post-implementation review. I've already mentioned all of these areas. We're very supportive of that, mindful of the comments already made about timing and whether or not this might be a priority or not in the near term. But probably most importantly, really understanding what has changed since the market set out its objectives, noting that water security and water scarcity challenges are significantly higher than they were when the market was conceived. And does that mean that the retailers' roles in communicating with business customers are potentially need to evolve as well? Our second market-specific recommendation focused on some short-term measures to improve the functioning of the market. Unless you're close to the market, these may be more in the detail, but at a very high level, this is strengthening the protection for customers should a retailer fail and exit the market unexpectedly or in an unplanned way, aligning that to other regulated markets. And finally, introducing an appeals process for retailers, noting that they don't currently have the same mechanisms as water companies. So on the next slide, there are also some areas where we very much support broader recommendations for the market. I'm not going to read through all of these, you'll be pleased to hear. In total, we mapped against 19 of the 88 recommendations that align to our views as a central market operator. I don't have time and don't intend to talk those through today, but these are the ones that provide an overview of the key priorities. And so finally, to summarise, and then we'll take, I can see the chat after a slow start is now got lots and lots of questions in. So to summarise, we are supportive of the recommendations on the business retail market, recognising that these are unlikely to be high priorities. So our focus is on how we can support DEFRA to get the changes that we need without it being a huge drain on resources. However, we also recognise that whilst my team in MOSL is not directly impacted by the regulatory change that was highlighted by Alice at the beginning, many of the people we work with every day will be. And inevitably, there is a very human impact to any form of reform and any form of change. I think all of us can agree that we work in an industry that is made up of passionate people doing their best for customers and the environment every day. And I think it's really important to recognise that the reform that is needed is structural, it's regulatory, it's political, and is not a direct reflection of the hard-working people working within our sector. So just like it's important to call out at the end, we'll continue to work with DEFRA colleagues. We were very pleased to hear that the team who've worked on the commission are going to be moving into a delivery role. That is really, really important. Having been involved in these sort of things in the past, you can spend quite a lot of time talking to the delivery team about what it is that the team that has recommended to them is recommending. So I think that's really, really positive. So we'll work closely with that team to support the implementation and progression of changes that directly support the business retail market, and continue to work with all those stakeholders, as I've said, some of whom will be directly impacted, to collectively navigate the changes. So thank you. Back to you, Jamie, to navigate the questions.
Thank you, Sarah. Such a valid point on the human impact. It is going to mean a lot of changes for a lot of people, and so it's great that you've raised that. I'm going to stop talking about that and start talking about the questions. So thank you to everyone who's put in the questions. I think we may have lost Alice briefly from the chat, but we will continue with Oscar and Sarah asking, and if Alice can get her computer working again, and she'll obviously pop back in again. And the first question through was from Emily, and the question was, how do you maintain momentum so that the majority of the 88 recommendations get implemented? And I'm hands up between you, Sarah and Oscar. Who wants to go first?
I'll answer that first from a business retail market perspective. As I briefly touched on at the end, we completely recognise that in the grand scheme of the changes that are needed to our sector, the business retail market is unlikely to be high on the list of 88. So from our perspective, it's around how can we support the DEFRA team in providing them with some of the answers in our role as market operator of convening across the sector. So from a very specific perspective, for me, it's about what can we do to help so that we're not asking the DEFRA team to start from scratch.
Excellent. Oscar, you're nodding. Did you have anything else to add?
Yeah, there's a really helpful table in Sir John's report which sets out which of his recommendations would require primary legislation, secondary legislation, or no legislation at all. I think that's quite a good sort of place to go if you're wondering how much we can get done in the next 5 years. I think it's the political realities that will drive this. So I think that there is structural reform needed, as Sarah said, and some of that structural reform will need to wait for after the general election because it is so political. But we're going to get a lot done. And actually, I think from point A to point B, in between, there is a huge amount in John's report that can be achieved outside of legislation, and we can make progress on all of it. What I'd say to everyone around table today, as exactly as Sarah said, we can play a role in helping DEFRA to do that, and the new regulator, and their door is open to that. They really want the support, and they're very welcoming of it. So I think there's a leadership role for us to play as companies and an industry as a whole.
Absolutely. Thank you. The second question is from a friend of the South East and part of the South East community, Joe. And Joe has asked, who do you believe should primarily take on the role of public defence of the water industry, and what strategies could make that advocacy more effective in rebuilding public confidence?
That's a great question, Joe. I've had the answer to that. So as much as it pains me to say this after working for a water company for 24 years, I think it's really hard for water companies to do that. I think the public discourse has taken a direction which means that often water company-led discussions become that there's an assumption that there's a hidden agenda, which personally I don't think there generally is. So my personal view is that water companies should focus on delivering excellent services every day, so providing clean, safe drinking water, taking wastewater away, working with their local communities and focusing in on what they're delivering brilliantly. In terms of the water sector more generally, I think we do need leadership from government. I think we need leadership from organisations who have the ear of the public. I think Waterwise do a brilliant job of talking about water efficiency. They are very much a trusted advisor. I would hope that in MOSL we're seen as independent and trusted. I think it's really important that we have a common narrative, and if I may be provocative, I think it's important that politicians and others don't go for headline grabs, but stay consistent that we will always need water. It is essential to life. We will always need water and wastewater infrastructure, and actually let's just calm it down, focus on delivering rather than throwing stones at each other.
Yes, and yes. Oscar, do you want to add anything?
I think well said by Sarah, and I think you're spot on in terms of who needs to do this. I think it's really, I find it personally really difficult sometimes, this situation, because I think to Sarah's point, we don't have a hidden agenda. We're trying to do the right thing, and that's true of everyone on this call. Unfortunately, Joe, the answer to this is that this is going to take time, and you'll still have difficult conversations at Christmas with your family for a few years, but it is going to get better. And it's a really tough one to swallow. But I think what's changing, and this is why I spoke about this narrative arc, is that government genuinely wants to help us improve. And that is an incredibly positive place for us to be. So we just need to focus on that. We just need to focus on delivering. And if we can do that, I think in a relatively short space of time, we are going to turn a page on this. We don't have a choice but to do that. We can't keep on as we are. So that needs to be the focus. And hopefully within the next few years, we will turn that page.
Absolutely. I joined the water industry because it felt like an industry we were providing a lot of good. Water is absolutely needed, and therefore, an industry where I can make an impact, a real impact on my family and my community. So, absolutely on that. The next question was from Lydia, our organizer, so I'm definitely going to ask this one. Will Cunliffe be the turning point for the sector needs, and will there be enough change, enough to change media and public narrative?
So I think we've already touched on this. I guess to answer the first part of that question, Lydia, I think only if we make it happen. This isn't going to, nothing's going to change simply because Sir John Cunliffe and a group of people have come up with some recommendations and made those to government. With all due respect to DEFRA colleagues, the change is needed throughout the sector, and it needs a positive attitude and a desire to move things forward. And I think it's been really positive to see the way in which water companies and Water UK have embraced these recommendations, and across the board the regulators recognising, as I said, this is a people impact, a real focus on let's not try and defend the past or argue about the detail, let's focus in on moving things forward. So I think the answer to your question is, if we want it to be, it will be. If we spend the next 2 years arguing about whether it was the right question in the first place, I think it won't be.
Good point. And Oscar, do you want to add again? You're all good. The next question, it seems like a conversation, Martin, you're having with Oscar in the chat. So I'll come back to one, circle around back to that later if there's time. But I'll pass that one and go on to one from Chris around: is there an anticipation of a greater testing requirement for microplastics, both in terms of clean and wastewater? I think, Oscar, I think that's one for you.
Yeah, should I come back on this? Yes. So those of you that are close to the wastewater regulation will know that there's quite a lot of work going on bioresources, and in particular sludge use in agriculture at the moment, and the regulations that surround that. And understandably, there is some concern about the disposal of these products to the land bank, and the science is not clear. So we have a research centre in Exeter at the University of Exeter called CREW, which we've co-funded, which is doing some research on this. And I think there are others around the country doing it, but that research is going to take time. But Sir John has been very, very clear in his recommendations, and I expect that the government see it the same way, that water, and in particular on the wastewater side, regulation needs to look at both environmental harm but also public health. And Chris Whitty was on the panel of people that supported Sir John with his review, and I think will continue to play that role. And there's been a suggestion that there's a kind of chief medical officer role within the water industry for a scientist to look at these issues. So there's a lot more to come on that front, and I expect that the answers will follow the science, and that will take some time. So those kinds of things may be more of an issue for the next Parliament, but I expect that we will continue to work on those a little bit more intensively in the next few years. Yes.
Thank you. I think that covers off Chris's next question as well, which is on a similar area. Well, now we have one from Steve Yule.
Can I just pick up very briefly, Jenny, on Chris's next question about this point around biohazards and testing? Sir John was asked this at the launch event last Monday, and I think it's really important, the point he made about trade-offs, that it is not tenable that everybody should be able to swim in every watercourse and there not be E. coli in it. So I think that balance of regulation actually is what you will see by bringing those regulators together, that yes, there needs to be clean, safe spaces for people to swim in the wild, but that won't be every single watercourse, because that would mean a level of investment that, back to Alice's point, we simply won't be able to sustain. So sorry, I just wanted to make that point.
Cool, thank you, Sarah. Next question is from another friend of the South East and previous chair for many years of the South East Committee, Steve Yule. And he asked two questions. So I'll go through the first one. Given the current regulatory model covers both England and Wales, and a review calls for two separate models, how do you think that the split will be managed, and how independent do you think it would be? Tough question. Is that Oscar?
Sorry, have a go, Sarah. Yeah. We don't know. I'm afraid is the answer at the moment. I think we're going to have to see. And we spent quite a bit of time with Sir John and his team talking about this and other issues. All of the companies did. What's clear is that there are some elements of the current system that work pretty well, that work really well. And there are elements of the current system that are not working. I think from the perspective of our investors, their main concern at the moment is political risk. And I think that will continue to be the case. And I think Sir John has spent quite a bit of time thinking about that. So there will need to be a degree of independence for this new regulator if it's going to work. But what we've also recognised is you can't just have independence, right? And this is the point that Alice was making earlier. There are genuine political decisions to be made about trade-offs between affordability, the environment, and other priorities. And John, I think, is really clear that those are going to be extremely difficult for governments to make, but they're going to have to be made if we're going to get this right. And I think that will be the focus for government, and the regulator will focus on other things. But we'll have to see. We'll have to see when they consult on this.
Thank you, Oscar. The next question is from Tom. Around, would a reduction in the use of potable water for industry commercial needs not just a reduction and cap in the total licensed volumes of water allocated, rather than a reallocation of those to economic growth?
I don't think so, Tom. So certainly all the conversations we've been having with central government, with DEFRA, and most recently with MHCLG, which is the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government, there is very much the concept of releasing headroom. So where we have and I think the focus in the report around systems thinking, around systems planning, really supports this concept of, if we have large industrial usage of the highest quality drinking water in the world being used for non-potable purposes, that is drinking water that could be used to provide either domestic customers in new housing or new business growth, which needs to be drinking water quality. So certainly all of the conversations that we're having is that this is a genuinely an interest in releasing headroom back in. I see it very, very simply as a sort of big network with a certain amount of water in, and I know it's not that simple, but releasing more water back into that system to enable growth, be that household or non-household. But
Absolutely.
to that point, there is the need for change in order to enable that, because at the moment, for example, there is no tariff, there's no ability to charge for non-potable water for non-potable use. So that's what the Commission recognises, is the need to make some changes to the regulatory system to enable that headroom to be created.
Thank you, Sarah. Next questions from Ian. I see again, Ian. Some of the previous decisions on bill increases have been a result of government pressure on the regulator and minimising bill increases due to the state of the economy. Do you think that the change proposed will reduce this interference and influence?
So I'll make one quick point on that, and then Oscar pick it up. I think a really interesting point here in the detail, there's been a lot of focus in the media about the, I don't like to, I'm not going to repeat the word that Steve Reed used, but the significant changes to Ofwat as a regulator and moving those regulators together under one single regulator. But a really, really important point in the recommendations around the economic regulator is the need for the econometric model to be seen as an input to the business planning process, but not to be the only thing that determine outcomes. So there is a strong focus on greater understanding of asset infrastructure health, on regional variations in that, and therefore more, I would say, intelligence, not in a rude way, but actual intelligence as in data and evidence around asset health needs for a particular water company to derive a certain outcome, and then the econometric model to be an input to that. I think if we adopt those principles, then a top-down directive around keeping back bills flat or declining in real terms becomes a sort of interesting input, but it isn't what determines your level of asset investment.
Thank you, Sarah. There's two left. We've got 1 minute, so quickly try and bring them through. But if not, sorry to Dan if you don't quite get to your question. But Edward's next one is there confidence that the new regulator will be fair and accurate in their work with a shared aim of driving growth and enhancement in the water industry, rather than potentially being overly harsh and appeasing to the public?
Shall I have a go?
View, but Oscar, I'll let you go.
Yeah, shall I have a go? Yeah. So look, I think my observation is that it's often said in our industry, isn't it, that it's Ofwat's fault that I can't build X. You know, we try that one every 5 years, and the reality is there's only so much money to go around, and working as a regulator is incredibly hard. Some of us on this call will have done it before, or maybe doing it at the moment. And I think the spirit of this review, and I think where we're headed, as Sarah mentioned earlier, is a really, really positive direction of travel. And there are some very specific recommendations in Sir John's review, which I think are being taken really seriously, and government and the regulators will start to take seriously as well as they come together about how we regulate in the future. And I expect government will be setting out some broad principles which the regulators will need to work to make sure that we head in that direction. So don't blame Ofwat. I don't think it's their fault, and it is, you know, usually the politics that drives things, and we know where we're headed in that on that front. So I think we're in a good place, and it will get better.
Excellent, thank you. If it's okay on the speakers, because I'm aware we've now gone slightly over, but we still have 147 people still listening to. So Dan Lim, hi Dan. I see you in a month as well, no doubt. How engaged did you think the Cunliffe? How do you think Cunliffe will be with the water sector since the report has been published? And do you expect this to be something he would revisit in the future, or leave to others?
I don't know the answer to that. My guess would be that he's done his job and he will go back into his day job with a new appreciation of the wonderful world of water and wastewater, but I don't envisage him putting his toe back in the water, if I can be really cheesy.
Cool. Thank you everyone. Thank you everyone for staying. The final thing is to again say thank you to the speakers. It's been an excellent and informative session, and to give us a final plug for our next events coming up. For those who are interested in the Southeast, and I'm aware that a lot of people come from around the country today, but there is a Southeast President's Day coming up, where we'll be discussing the linkage between energy and water and wastewater, and is there something we can do together as a group of utilities in order to help with reduction of demand and affordability for customers. And then we have our annual conference coming up in Plymouth in September, and then that's followed then by our Southeast EDI conference in Birmingham. We've now gone national with it and into Birmingham, and that is at the end of October on the 23rd. These are all on the website along with many others, so please do have a look and get involved. Thank you again for everyone for listening. I hope to see as many of you as possible at the annual conference in Plymouth, which is on my birthday, just putting it out there in case people are thinking of buying me a drink. I'll stop there. And again, thank you to Lydia for all the hard work behind, and also to Abby at HQ for everything that she's done to help. So thank you. Enjoy your afternoon, and look forward to seeing everyone soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie.